It's a really good thought to begin with. We know pilgrimage, and you had wonderful slides about why we make pilgrimages. And another question is, why do we study saints? Why do Catholics do that? And it's for a number of reasons. One is that the saints are our very best commentaries on the gospel. They show us the gospel principles in very concrete, lived examples that you and I can understand. And the saints are all so diverse, and yet they're not contradictory. They're showing us different aspects of what it means to be a disciple of Jesus, and how do we actually become the presence of Jesus in the world today. The saints, we study them because they're dauntless in faith. No matter what the setback is, no matter what the persecution, no matter what the contradiction, no matter the sins of others in their lives, no matter their own sins, they kept faith in Jesus Christ.
So you're saying there are like real pilgrim leaders for our pilgrimage in this life.
And that's it. Exactly. That no matter what, they believed in the power of Jesus. They believed in his mercy. They believed in his word. They believed in his nearness and engagement in their life. And the saints are the most beautiful people. They have beauty beyond what you'll ever find here in Hollywood. They have a beauty that transcends, that outshines aging, that outshines physical disabilities, even emotional wounds, physical wounds, spiritual wounds. That's why we study saints. And Teresa of Avila is alive, and she's going to be with us today. She's happy for us to go back and visit her homeland.
So for this particular pilgrimage, we're going to be going to Spain, of course, where she was born and where we find most of things about Saint Teresa of Avila.
There you go. All right, so Avila, there says 68 miles out of Madrid. Most people fly into Madrid. And then Alba de Tormes, you can see the distance, is where she died. But she traveled all over there. Some of the priests and some of the bishops and some of the Inquisition leaders called her the gadabout nun, because she was founding Carmels all over the territory you see on the map right now. And then you see right here the walled area of Avila. You see where the cathedral is, and then you see how close she is. This is all walking distance, this area between the cathedral and her convent.
Right. Inside the walls, it's very small. It's not that big.
It's very dense. And she was born within the walls.
And here are these beautiful walls that we hear about.
There you go. And it's so inspiring. It's so beautiful, because most pilgrims will fly into Madrid and then you get on a bus and you drive miles through open fields, and all of a sudden you see those famous walls. You speak of fortress, protection, and here within the walls is the baptismal font where St. Teresa began her life in Christ. And this is really important. And it's an important place as a point of pilgrimage, because Teresa of Avila was not born a saint. She started her journey to become a saint right here. And this is the same place that we all, when we're baptized, the possibility of being a saint is now that possibility, that invitation, and the means to become a saint is given to us freely at our baptismal font. This is the night. They light her fortress walls at night. But notice on the left-hand corner, the pavilion there with the four pillars. That did not, those pavilion, those four pillars did not exist at her time, but they built it afterwards to memorialize an event of her early childhood. What was going on in Spain at the time? All of Europe was in between, well, the whole world was in between coming out of the Renaissance and moving into the age of discovery and exploration. So many of the colonies in the New World were being established as Spanish or Portuguese, so of colonies. So it was a major time of expansion. And she grew up as a very small child hearing of these stories, the quest for gold, the conquering of the infidels for Christ. And it enkindled in her a great desire. Now that's part of her spirituality. We'll come back to the point of desire. But as a young child, she took it upon herself to come to the conclusion, she was 7 years old, Rodrigo, which is her older brother, who's 10 years old, who she loved. Rodrigo, let's go preach the gospel to the Moors. Proclaim the gospel, and we will be martyred, and we will win heaven quickly. So off they go, and they are found. They were thwarted by their uncle, who was on horseback and who whisked his two little renegade niece and nephew up onto the horse and restored them to the family. And then the next slide shows us how they deal with that.
Sister, this is a wonderful story. I just wanted to orient people. We're in the early years of the 1500s, right?
Yes, so at this time it would have been 1522.
Right. And Martin Luther had posted his theses in 1517.
Correct.
Columbus had gone out in 1492, and this is why you're saying that Mexico and Latin America were being visited by the Spanish fleet. And America had just started to be touched. In the mid-1500s, they came to St. Augustine, Florida.
Yes.
And St. Teresa of Avila, therefore, is a post-Reformation, and then her life will be intertwined with that whole question of Catholicism and Reform, and that's what I wanted to situate us quite clearly.
Okay, that's super, Robert, thank you, because that actually, that's part of her spirituality is the response to the Protestant Reformation. And that will become essential, you'll see, as we go on. Thanks for bringing that in. Now, when they got intercepted by their uncle and he restored them, this picture was actually taken outside. This is an inner courtyard. I believe it's at Alba de Tormes. I forget. I think we took this picture at Alba de Tormes. But it's to remind the nuns that when they were restored back to their parents, their response, they still had this burning desire to proclaim Jesus. And they wanted to win heaven quickly. So they formed a little hermitage in their backyard and would wander, would repeat over and over again, forever. Heaven is forever. Rodrigo, how long is forever? Well, he said it's forever, ever. And then she'd say, oh, I don't think so. I think it's forever, ever, 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 ever. And they kept grappling with with a little 7-year-old mind, what does forever mean? And that shaped what she wanted to do with her life. She gets diverted along the way, but that was a strong kindling of understanding the beauty and the power of what we are called to. So then what happens?
Sister, I just wanted to interject. That is so beautiful because today we are so present-oriented. Present.
Yes.
We look at time, we look at our watches, we think about tomorrow, maybe the first quarter results, and we forget about eternity.
And that's one of the gifts of the saints.
Yeah.
Yeah. Now, if you could stay here for a little bit, because what happens after this picture is sad and it's painful, and that Teresa, when she was about 15 years old, closer to, they think, 14, her mother died. The wrenching pain of losing her mother and realizing like her childhood came to a screeching halt. She realized that life isn't stable, isn't secure as it had appeared to her, and that the one that she depended upon would not always be there. Now, she was surrounded by her siblings. She had 11 siblings, a father who cared for her. And she herself tells us in her autobiography that she turned to Our Lady and said, "You must fill in this void for me. You must be my mother." She lost her mother when she's finding her identity as a young lady. And she herself says in her autobiography, very quickly, she learned to love perfumes and lace and pretty clothes and looking pretty and having nice fingernails and nice hands. And that was the beginning of her being captured. She has a very ardent temperament, and where she goes full-hearted. She has a quality about her that her earliest biographer, he becomes a Franciscan friar, Fray Luis de Leon, her contemporary, described her as, she can beguile anyone. You walk into a room, it doesn't matter who's in that room, they're going to be attracted to Teresa like iron is attracted to a magnet. And she herself says, I loved being noticed. I loved being the center of attraction. She was physically beautiful. She was wealthy. She was intelligent. Most women were not taught to read and write. Her mother and father educated her. And she loved it. And she had a large circle of cousins. The family was pretty, even though so many things were happening in Spain and opening up and new ideas and new exploring, there was still a culture of inflexible rules. And so they kept her within the family, but her family was huge. She had nieces and nephews and she had cousins. So they would gather and socialize. And it was not the kind of relationships her father wanted for her. Exactly the kind of relationships Teresa wanted. Evidently, her father was not a good businessman. And he had a large estate, so he would travel, and it would take him longer to accomplish goals than he would have liked. So he was away from the family a lot. So that's when Teresa would organize her parties. And all her cousins would come, and they would eat and drink and gossip and have fun. Teenagers. Evidently, she's very vague about this, but all the historians pretty much agree on there was something she was ashamed of. And she says that in her autobiography. And we assume that one of her older cousins fell in love with her. And when her father got drift of it, he said, I'll take care. He married her mother when her mother was 15. He wasn't going to let his daughter get married at 15. So he enrolled her at the Augustinian convent boarding school in town. It was very small, 12 to 15 girls lived there. And she was furious that the rug got pulled out from underneath her and her cousins got to party and she was going to a convent school. Not happy camper. However, when she got there, the girls loved her. The sisters loved her. So she got into her element. But she's strong temperament. She's an ardent character. Those kinds of rebellion feelings don't get dissolved with one good confession and a good recreation. She's still in turmoil there. There's a young sister, 34 years old, very mature for her age. She's put in charge of the young girls, and Teresa respected her. See, part of Teresa's character, and you see that in the very beginning of her autobiography, is Teresa is a woman of integrity. She's an honest person. She hated the fact that she was deceiving her father. It put turmoil in her heart. And it put turmoil in her heart because she had a tremendous fear that she would lose her honor. And now she's whisked away, plops down into a cloistered academy, starting to get adjusted to it, starting to love it, but she's not going to be a nun. And she's real clear, I am not going to be a nun. But it wasn't quite as abhorrent to her as it had been when she was partying. In that turmoil of the soul always shows itself in the body. So within the year, Teresa got sick. So her father goes to take her out, and he goes to take her to a doctor, get medical help. And in those days, medical help was herbs. And they had to travel quite a ways. So they spent the night at her uncle, her father's older brother, who was a widow. And he had means, but he spent his means on books. So when they spent the night there on their travel, Uncle had her read to him one of his spiritual books. And she says, I had no desire to read that book. But she had this insatiable desire to please other people. So if it would please her uncle, she read the book. And in that night, the stirring for God, the stirring for eternity, started to be rekindled. What we see on the screen now was revived within her. So she returns home. She does not return to the school. She returns, and she lives with her father and her siblings. She had an older sister who she was married and had her own children by that time, but really looked out for Teresa as a mother. And Teresa knows she needs to enter the convent. So she goes to the convent. Why don't we go to the next slide? This is the Convent of the Encarnacion. Teresa enters there, and she did not enter the convent out of love of God. She entered the convent because she didn't want to go to hell. She knew that her temperament was so ardent that she would do no half measures. And as she stayed in the world, her chances of staying true to who she was and who Christ is was less. It's not a good reason to enter the convent. That's what got her in there. Her father was very opposed. Now, part of it is assumed that during those years after the Augustinian convent, when she was at home recuperating, studying on her own, she managed a lot of the affairs for her dad. Did not want to lose his right hand. It's also pretty much assumed that Teresa entered the convent because she says that she knew her soul would be in peril. But she didn't want to, reading her writings carefully, she reminds the sisters, her nuns, years later. Now, sisters, don't complain. Women who are married have more to offer than we do. They have to please their husband. We're pleasing Jesus, so she'd encourage them. But there's innuendos that Teresa knew her mother had a hard life. Her mother, she didn't want to die when she was 33, having had 12 children. So Teresa enters this convent, and she gets along well. She's content to a point. She loves chanting the office, and she becomes the favored person in the convent. They love her. She's got a delightful personality. There's just some people you like to hang out with. Teresa of Avila was one of them. The other sisters really enjoyed her. I've never been inside this convent, but the people that have told me it's built for approximately 20 to 30 sisters. When Teresa entered, there were 120 to 150 sisters living in that convent. Poorly managed, very poor funds coming in. The sisters had to fend for themselves. They had no common meals, So if the families brought you food, you got McDonald's. And if they didn't bring you food, offer it up. The wealthy ones, which Teresa of Avila was, the wealthy ones had apartments. That's what what happened when she left on the night of November 2nd, during the night, because her father was so opposed. And she writes, it was wrenching. It was the hardest thing she'd ever done in her life. And it felt like every bone was being wrenched out of its socket. It's pretty descriptive. When her father learned where she was, he did not fight because he knew his daughter. So he went down with the superior, met with the superior and arranged that Teresa would have her own apartment with her own kitchen. Because life was so mitigated. It was lukewarm because of the circumstances. Family members could send their servants into the cloister to cook for their daughter who didn't know how to cook. That also created a burden for Teresa, because remember, she's an upright person. She saw how she lived, and she saw how her companions lived, and she knew it wasn't right. The struggle, things were not completely resolved within her own heart. So she continued to struggle, even though she loved praying in the office. There was not a lot of silence when you have that many nuns. She was sent to the parlor many times to entertain donors because of her personality. And it all fed into her dividedness. That's an important piece, because dividedness is a consequence of original sin. We all deal with it. Teresa, with her ardent temperament, it broke her health again. She was in the convent for about 2 years, and her health broke. So her father came to pick her up and took her. She was still a Carmelite, but she was they couldn't care for her. So he's going to take her to the same doctor, 2 days travel away, except the only difference is this is winter, and doctors only worked with herbs. So they went. God takes everything. God takes anything in our life that works into our good. So they stay at her uncle's again for quite a few months until spring comes and they can continue the travels and get the care that she needs. And it was at this stay that her uncle introduced her to a book by Francisco Asuna, and it's called The Third Spiritual Alphabet. It's easily accessible. And in that book, Teresa was introduced to the prayer of recollection. And everything changed for her. When she was in the cloister, she loved to pray the divine office, the Psalms. She knew that if she were not putting her heart and her mind into it, it's not prayer. But that's all she knew. So she knew vocal prayer, to be vocal prayer, to be real prayer, had to have her heart and her mind in it. But she didn't know about the prayer of recollection for this illness, and she was there for months. And she was awakened to this beautiful world that she had within herself, that she could calm her mind. She didn't have beepers and internet and all the interruptions you and I have. Still is a way of prayer that is a healing response to the fragmentation of our lives. She learned that she could quiet her mind, that she could let go of the imagination of what she was wondering her friends were doing, what they thought of her, that she could let go of worries. What am I going to eat tonight? Who's going to come visit at the parlor? that she could just be in the presence of Jesus, that she could imagine him, what he looked like. She could read a line from Scripture, that she could be honest with him, that she could show him what she was experiencing or what she was afraid of or what she desired, and listen for him and rest in his presence. This is why in her teaching, she lays such importance on the prayer of recollection. And she brings it up. I can give you the references at the end of where she teaches in her writing. All three of her major writings, she goes back to that. That from any circumstance we find ourselves, her circumstance, it was alienation from the convent, her normal routine and friends. It was poor health. It was having to shelter in place, that Christ used to draw her within herself to find him present, where he had been dwelling since her baptism. She returned, regained sufficient health. She returned to the convent with renewed fervor, renewed joy. And that lasted 2 years. She was absolutely committed to praying with the prayer of recollection. She would go to her cell where it was quiet, and she would turn off all the distractions. Most of them were in her own mind, which is, for most of us, it's the imagination, it's the memory. It's also the to-do list, and it's also the cell phone. But she'd turn it all off and be with Christ. That period of renewed fervor lasted 2 years. And then Teresa began living the divided life again, wanting to know the gossip in the convent. It was circumstantial. The poverty continued, so the superiors sent her to the parlor most often. And she loved it. It wasn't the fact that she was going to the parlor. It was the fact that she was getting fed by it. And that actually marked a 20-year period of mediocrity. And she knew that she was conflicted, but she didn't know why. So she filled up with more talking, more sweets. She loved the sweets. Her friends brought her exactly what she liked. She loved it, so she filled up her senses with human satisfaction so that she could bury in quiet that turmoil. Then one day, let's go to the next one. This is absolutely a pivotal moment in her life. Oh wait, this is before that. Okay, this is the real painting. It's a little bit of a touched up painting, but it's the real one that Teresa of Avila sat for. The real one has a little bit of a mark on her cheek. And she had to sit for I don't know how many hours, and she's an impatient woman. She had things to do. She needed to proclaim Christ. So when she finally saw it, she's still Teresa of Avila. And she said to the painter, "Why did you make me so bleary-eyed?" All of Teresa had not been transformed, but stay with her because she shows us how. This 20-year, nope, I'm sorry, I got that slide out of order. Let's go to the next one. Nope, that was it. This is the moment that turned her life irrevocably. It says that they had moved a statue of Ecce Homo. And that's all it says. They had moved it into the oratory. I don't know if it had been in another place in the convent or someone donated it and then they moved it in. So it's not clear. But for whatever the circumstance, on one particular day, and she says in her writings that she was at her lowest ebb. She said, my soul was tired. My soul was weary. And yet I was the one that would not let my soul rest because of those unbridled desires. Connect that with the desires of the 7-year-old that wanted to go proclaim Christ to the Moors, be martyred, and win heaven quickly. The desires of that young girl who wanted to be the center of attention. The desire of that girl who came to the convent but still had mixed desires. When she saw this statue, she said, it is as if scales fell from my eyes. And I saw him with new eyes. And I saw myself with new eyes. And what I saw broke my heart. But what really happened was the barriers of her heart were broken. And grace and mercy could flood in. She said, I knew when I saw the shredded, diminished Christ that he was shredded and diminished for me, for love of me. This is an essential part of her whole spirituality. And that is, at the time, theologically, the Franciscans and the Dominicans were having great theological discussions on if there had been no original sin, would the second person of the Blessed Trinity, the Word, would the Word have become flesh? Why did the Word become flesh? For Teresa, it was clear as day. The Word became flesh out of friendship for his people, out of love for his people.
Sister, you broke up there. Could you repeat that again? The word became
Yes.
flesh because
Of love for his people, for friendship's sake, to be with his people. If you talk to people who run hospice, they will tell you when a spouse is dying or a mother or a father is dying, very frequently the loved one that's not dying will crawl into the bed to lay close to their loved one. They're suffering, they want to be with them. That was the same love that motivated the Word to be with us so that he could make it possible for us to be with the Trinity. The idea of friendship, that I can be with him in my woundedness. I can be with him in my nakedness, in my dirty, in my confusion, in my messy, in my anger, in my longing, in my beauty. Wherever I am, I don't need to put a beautiful face on him. He is my friend. He has come here to be with me. How many of us have had mothers that have cradled us in our arms while we vomited all over the place? But where would the mother want to be? The mother would want to be holding the child. That's a mere blurred, dim reflection of the heart of Christ. And from this point on, everything changed for Teresa. Conversion, transformation, not two separate processes. Conversion takes time. There may be a definitive moment, and there frequently is a definitive moment. But we grow in it. And that's one of St. Teresa's essential messages, and why we have 7 mansions. We're going to roam in and out. We're going to not go first, second. It's not like grammar school. Grade second, grade third, grade, unless you flunked, and everybody makes fun of you, you have to go back. It's not like that at all. The mansions, you roam in and out. And what you didn't learn at the beginning, you may be in the 6th mansion, and he may send you back to the 2nd mansion, because now you're ready and you can integrate it. We laugh in the convent. When I became postulate directress, which I'd been in the convent for maybe 12 years, so I was really scared. Like, what do I know about being a postulate directress? The only thing I know about that is because I was on the other side of the coin. So I picked up books that we had read as postulates. And I went to my postulate directress, and I said, when did they put these new pages in there? I didn't get this when I was a postulate. And she laughed. She said, you can't get what you can't get. Well, it's the same thing it is with conversion, with being transformed. You can't beat yourself. You can get what you can get. He's the master. He's the leader. If you miss something, he'll put something in your path and allow you to go back to an earlier mansion. Get it, and there's freedom. Life.
Sister?
Yes.
You've now brought us to another level here, and you've used a word that is not yet defined. You've spoken of mansions. And as I detect your transition, you're taking us to the center of her spirituality, where she speaks of 7 mansions or 7 levels of spiritual descent or ascent toward God, toward union with the divine, which is her great mystical spirituality. But this was referred to as the interior castle, room to room in your interior castle. Am I correct?
Correct. And some translations from the Spanish may call it the 7 mansions. Most of them call it the interior castle. And basically, though, what she was going back to was that experience when she saw the Ecce Homo. And she realized, and when she began her prayer of recollection, of the beauty and the dignity of the human soul. So when Teresa writes her mansions, her interior castle, it's her last work. In reality, it's same with the autobiography was her first one, written under obedience. She's exposing her own soul to you and me. She's writing about her own 7 mansions. It's an analogy. There's no human structure of 7 mansions, but she's saying it's circular and it goes inward. And she's making a point that it's progressive and it's not tightly defined, but these are the general signals of what you can expect. General description of experiences. We'll come back to that in just a second. But it's the idea that he is within. And in the 7th mansion, the Lord of life dwells there. We are to move away from the enticements of the world. And then what's worse is the enticements of myself, so that I can live in the interior of my own soul. She uses an expression in the interior castle, one of the mansions. Do you know how much time we spend living in other people's houses?
Mm-hmm.
When we have the Lord of life within ourselves. We ourselves are the mansion. We ourselves are the home where the triune God lives. He's longing. He came as in this condition so that he might heal us, that we might be with him.
Sister, what I'm struck by is you are giving us a key of understanding of who we are, which has been forgotten in our society and even often in our church. And you still hold the tradition that the human soul can be beautiful and can draw close to God through this process of purification and interior pilgrimage. Doesn't matter how wealthy you are or how educated you are. It's a process of coming deeper and deeper into being, not doing. And this is why you are contemplative nuns. And this is how we can follow you on your journey.
And this is not meant for contemplative nuns alone. I'm also an active. We have hospitals, we care for elders, and we teach children, we have retreat work. But it is not a nun's work. It is a nun's work to straighten. Okay, this goes to her founding of Avila. Her point in founding Avila, St. Joseph's in Avila. This happened at the Encarnacion, big convent. Not far away, she founded a very, very poor convent. But her reasoning was, and tell me if this is not applicable for our day today, is that since he has so few friends, I determined that we would love him without bounds. Now, does that say you have to be a nun? No. Mm-mm. We have to be the prophets. We are the visible witnesses. We are here to call and teach and help and support. She also said, since the hierarchy and the theologians are put on the front line, which this was the Protestant Reformation and the Moors. Since they're put on the front lines and you and I are poor women, she's smart, she knew what to say. Since we're poor women, we're going to be his best friends to give them the oxygen and the blood flow to do their fighting if we are praying for them. That's our job. But this call to interior prayer is for anyone who has been baptized. And I have said this very often when I'm with groups, and I will have 5 or 6 or 10 or 20 sisters sitting there, different communities, or 5 or 10 or 20 priests sitting there, and 100 lay people, and I will say, okay, priests and sisters, weigh in on this statement. Please disagree with me. But I think I have met more mystics that are truck drivers, housewives, executives, than I have nuns and priests, and they all go. I buried a grandma last week who went out of this world physically radiant because she knew that God saw within her his own image. Never a word of complaint because she was radiant because I have God within me. This is our call. That's why the baptismal font is so important. Because that image can be defaced, that image of Christ that we received. John of the Cross says we have an etching of Christ within us, and it's our life work to complete the drawing. That image of Christ that was imprinted in our core of our being at our baptism, that can be defaced. That image can be disgraced. It can never be effaced. It's ours. Beautiful, isn't it?
Well, I had to write it down.
Well, sisters, we are now at about 45 minutes in. We have,
and we're going to stay here for 8 days.
Okay, maybe we definitely can come back. And
keep going. Let's go.
I think there's a couple of people here that are on a mystical journey, and they'll probably want to raise the question with you of what best, as a spiritual advisor. We've got 2 or 3 in Teresa's life where she had a friendship with John of the Cross, she was contested for the creation of this new style monastery, and then she passed away. And the next question, she had some type of mystical experience herself, as far as I recall.
Oh, she had a bunch of them, but she always downplayed it. Could you back up once before the Ecce Homo? This is just a deer. This goes back to baptism. One more before that. This one, she's in the convent after she's had this conversion, and she meets a child on the staircase. And that's not unusual because remember, families could come and go, servants were said. So she looked down and she said, actually the way I learned it was that Teresa said to the little boy first, "Who are you?" And the little boy said, "Well, who are you?" And she said, "I am Teresa of Jesus. Yo soy Teresa de Jesús." And he smiled and he said, "Yo soy Jesús de Teresa." Baptism. She belongs to Jesus. Jesus belongs to her. Okay, go. And this is where Teresa and John had many conversations, and the legend is, this is where the mystical experiences, they both levitated, and she was so mortified because one of the sisters saw her floating up. This is kind of funny, but this is the confessional where John of the Cross helped Teresa with the reform. This is the new convent. Are you all seeing a split scene, or is that just mine?
I don't know, Mary, Bob, are you seeing a split screen or the full screen?
I see the two nuns in front of the door in one picture.
Oh, okay. Mine's split. Is it jumping? Is yours jumping?
No.
Okay. This is just a Los Angeles earthquake field.
Oh, no.
Oh.
Yeah.
Oh.
Okay. So this is the convent where she actually made the foundation of the reform. Poor. Happy though.
So she was a reforming Carmelite nun and created a reform within the Carmelite order.
Yes, with much persecution and much intrigue, and that's what caused the men were so against it that's why they put John of the Cross in prison for better than 9 months. I think it was closer to 10 months because there was so much opposition to it.
We had a question at this conversion. How old was she and how long had she been in the convent? Was it about 20 years in?
Correct. So that put her about 40 years old, 41 years old when she went through the conversion of the Ecce Homo.
And then she died about the age of 70?
67, which is really old for those days.
67. So she had 27 more years after her conversion to go around founding small convents, which young women flocked to because it was the stricter and somehow more passionate Christian life.
Yes, correct.
And so this spread very rapidly. There were probably hundreds of Carmelite nuns who followed her rule within 20 years of activity.
Yes. And I forget the number of foundations, but it was phenomenal because even with the priests, and that's really important to understand with the writing of Teresa of Avila, she hates writing. And she complains about it in the writing. And I wouldn't have to be doing this if sisters didn't force me to write. But she would much rather be spinning her wool and founding another foundation.
Yeah, well, writing can be a terrible task at times.
Praise God, she did it. Okay, the next one there. Oh, okay. This is the famous Bernini in Rome. And again, what this is saying, and Teresa she will describe to you many of her mystical experiences. John doesn't. And I think he may have been trying to counter, balance her because she was so out there. She just told you what she was thinking and feeling. And there were people that were skeptical of it, and some people condemned it, and then unfortunately, some people imitated it. You can't. It's a gift. What?
Can I
Pardon
just
me?
orient us here? This is a statue of Bernini in Rome. He did it about 200 years later in the 1700s. This is
Yes.
Teresa there on the right, and that's an angel. And the angel is going to pierce her heart with the presence of God in a way that is both painful, but also the greatest joy.
Yes. And that her actual, she does write about this, when she was pierced, and it created a love for God that permeated her whole being. She wouldn't trade it for anything. There is in Alba de Tormes a reliquary of her heart, and you can see the piercing on it.
Okay.
What she says throughout her whole, why she writes the interior castle, and she's very clear, and John is super clear. He repeats it repeatedly. Like, if you have experiences, walk over it. Just keep moving forward. Don't focus on the experience, because what happened in that moment, God accomplished. And now there's a new moment, and be present to that moment. This doesn't give you a ticket to ride, because I had this experience.
Well, I have to say that's one of the most important things that you've said, I think. Everyone gets excited if they feel there's a coincidence where God answers a prayer, and they kind of look around, they say, God, you've touched me. Or they have an experience of great joy or great serenity, or even an entire convulsive conversion experience. But you're saying you can become attached to the experience instead of continuing where you're called to go. I think that's what you said.
100%. And John will repeat that, and Teresa will repeat it multiple times. Super important. And what's important for us to understand is that this piercing of the heart with love of God is stemming from the grace of her baptism. And it may come in all kinds of different. The lady that we buried last week, she didn't have any great experience, but she grew in love of God every time she went to confession, every time she received communion, every time she went to adoration, every time she washed a dish, every time she changed a diaper.
Sister, what you're describing is a lifelong journey, we call it a pilgrimage, in which the soul's sufferings and the soul's consolations are a story, a novel, or a personal adventure between ourselves and God, the creator of the entire universe, giving us our greatness, revealing our weakness. But this whole story, this spiritual journey, this pilgrimage, is diminished and forgotten in our very materialistic society. It's forgotten the soul. So what I'm taking from your pilgrimage with us today is we must remember that we are souls with a great journey into our interior castle to the ultimate destination. Is that correct?
Beautifully, succinctly put.
Well, I mean, really, this is the struggle we have culturally to communicate this and to proclaim this and bear witness to this, because everyone kind of scoffs at it. They have also scoffed at it in prior centuries, but with science today and
Yes,
the amazing accomplishments of human beings, we forget that the profound beauty of God and his presence, his holiness, his awesomeness is basically consigned to a few people who still remember him, but everyone else is off with their computer devices and making money. And maybe this virus time has given us the chance to reflect a little more deeply on the transience of our lives and the true meaning of having this existence, to be and not to do.
I cannot agree with you more. It is, and going back to why we study the saints, because we need to be them now. And you can't argue with beauty and joy. You can't argue with peace and freedom. And these are the fruits of living a life that's non-conflicted, that is completely handed over to Jesus and allowing Jesus to truly be Lord of our lives. And it's no matter what our state in life is. That's our call.
Sister, could you tell us, and we're drawing near to the end of our first time, and then we'll have a time for questions, but can you sum up also telling us a bit about your own vocation and your experience of your journey toward God?
Thanks. I was raised Catholic in a Catholic family. My mother's a convert, good Catholic. I was educated by Catholic sisters, and the sisters taught us to pray 3 Hail Marys every single night before we went to bed, because each of us was created for a special purpose. And we should be praying as children to know our vocation is. And I thought that was really great advice for the other 53 kids in the class, because I already knew my vocation. I was getting married, and I was going to marry someone my parents approved of, and they would get along with my brothers, and we would live happily ever after. Thank you very much. And I was invited in 7th grade to a retreat at a Sacred Heart Retreat House in Alhambra, California, run by Carmelite sisters. The girls that invited me told me it was a Catholic slumber party, which I thought was really great, so I packed accordingly. And I did not participate. I am not proud of it, but I was a little bit of a big pill. And when I came back the next year, the sister said, "You're going to cooperate this year." They're chill, like, what's your problem? And I did not cooperate anymore. That I did the year before, which was 0. And on Saturday night, the sisters had us sitting on the floor. This would have been 1967. And they were playing the guitar. Novices were playing the guitar. And we don't have praise and worship music in those days. So they're praying, singing, "Where have all the flowers gone?" and wholesome songs. Not bad songs, but folk songs. And I was captured. Something washed over me, and I knew that he saw every ounce of me. And I knew that I was held, and I knew that I was loved, and I knew that I was wanted. And I knew that I needed to make a response. It wasn't a logical, sequential thought. It was an ambush.
So you have passed a lifetime now as a contemplative nun. What is left to complete your journey?
Oh, tons of purification. He's still working on me. Tons of purification. That when I go, there is nothing in my heart and my desires than him.
Well,
And to bring as many people along with me as I can.
okay, and then let's take leave of Teresa, and then we'll have questions. How would we summarize Teresa's journey here? We're looking at her death, I think.
A human journey that took time, that God took her qualities that could have all really destroyed her soul, her desire to be the center of attention, her desire for pleasure, her desire for wealth, and took those same desires, but as you saw, with her permission. It took quite a while to get her permission, because he's not a thug. He's not going to force it out of her. And took all of those same dynamics. The desire for wealth became the desire for spiritual wealth. The desire to share that spiritual wealth with others. The desire of pleasure came for, I want to please him. It's not about me. That transformation. And that if you read Teresa of Avila, understand that you have to read her with a pencil and maybe a highlighter. You've got a marker, mark up your book, because she teaches the way that you and I would hand polish our car. She knew exactly what she wanted to say. She knew what she was doing. She knew why she was doing it, and it would all be complete. But she did it in motion after motion after motion. So it's like having a conversation with your mother. She's talking to you, and that's what she wanted it to be. She was talking to her sisters. She was explaining it.
So she is a teacher, a mother, a sister, a woman,
A companion.
and then she became a doctor of the church.
The first woman doctor of the church.
And I think that sums
In what year? In what year did she become a doctor of the church?
A long time ago. I want to say 72, maybe 71, maybe 70, somewhere in the early 70s.
Okay. So that's the marvelous life of Teresa of Avila, which we can return to. But I need to ask a final question of you. What is your name in religion, and why have you chosen that name?
My name is Sister Regina Marie. I have no idea why I asked for Regina other than when I heard it as on one of the retreats when I was jabbering my full head off. I knew that I was Regina. And so Marie, because it's our Blessed Mother. I lost my mother when I was young as well, so she was with me. And then I asked for Jesus because of the story of Teresa and Jesus of Teresa. So I'm Sister Regina Marie of Jesus.
And then, so we should close with this prayer of Saint Teresa of Avila. Could you tell us about this prayer and read it to us, and then we'll...
Yes, she wrote poetry. She loved to have recreations with sisters. She would write songs. She would recite poetry for them. She would dance. There was joy and freedom in her. And she wrote this, it was on a bookmark, and it was found in her office book. And I wish that we could put it on every billboard that passes, because it is so pertinent for today. And this is the words of a mother speaking to us. That whatever our circumstances are, let nothing disturb you. Let nothing frighten you. All things are passing away. God never changes. Patience obtains all things. Whoever has God lacks absolutely nothing. God alone suffices. God alone fills the soul. God alone satisfies. And that's because she knew, because she had lived a divided life. Outward appearances, it looked fine. But inward, she was divided. God alone who suffices. Saint Teresa of Avila, pray for us.